Again, as I said, most of the slides are labeled big exposed so you know what you're looking at, at least what organ you're looking at, unless what I'm asking is on the slide label. Then, of course, it'll be covered. This, of course, is a section through the lymph node, which hopefully looks familiar. And several things you should be able to recognize. And again, this is right off your objective sheet. First off, the connective tissue membrane that surrounds this organ and also many other organs. It's shown here in blue. What is this?
Capsule.
That is the capsule. And again, it's not unique to a lymph node. We see a capsule on many organs, including the spleen and thymus as well. And here again, you can see the blue. This is the capsule. There's a space just below that. What's that known as? Subcapsular sinus. Again, we see the term sinus. That means cavity or space. Remember you dealt with sinuses in the skull. When you were studying the skull, remember?
Yes.
The sinuses? Okay. So this is the subcapsular sinus, also called the cortical sinus. Lymph will come into the lymph node via what vessels, which aren't obvious here? What are they? What are the vessels carry lymph? The afferent lymphatic vessels, okay? It penetrates the capsule, then it goes to the subcapsular sinus or the cortical sinus, comes along here, and then it follows the sinuses on either side of these projections of the capsule going to the interior of the organ. What are these called?
Trabeculae.
These are trabeculae. Trabecular singular, trabeculae plural. The spaces around them are called trabecular sinuses. So the lymph then flows via these trabecular sinuses and come into the interior of the organ, which we see here. And what's this region called? That's the medulla. So you can see it's quite different than the cortex. We've got a lot of spaces in here. What are these? Medullary sinuses, and the purple collections of cells which surround them are medullary cords. Okay? If we go back to the cortex, the outer region where your follicles are located, you can see it's much denser here, and then you have a lot of these follicles. And what is this? What kind of follicle? That is a secondary follicle. We can tell because it's got an obvious lighter stained region in the middle. That's called the germinal center, surrounded by a dark ring. Do you see that? Okay. So the whole thing is a secondary follicle. The outer darker part, which contains mature lymphocytes, the older lymphocytes, that's the corona, which means crown. And the lighter area here, with these developing lymphocytes, is the germinal center. Okay? And again, you've got a lot of these. And the follicles are all confined to the cortex. You will also see here some of the primary follicles, like we see right down here and here. And these are smaller, they're closer to the medulla, and they don't have that light germinal center, which you see in the secondary follicles. So you should be able to distinguish between them. Okay? And what is in these sinuses? What fluid? Lymph, not blood. And what does the lymph node do? It filters the lymph by virtue of what type of cell? Macrophages. So we have macrophages in these medullary cords. What else does the lymph node do? Helps to activate the immune system because you've also got what kind of cell here in these medullary cords? Lymphocytes. They become exposed to foreign antigens in the lymph, become sensitized, and produce more of their own, and this amounts to the immune response. Okay? So it's part of that immune response. Remember, lymphocytes, their function is what? Specific immunity. You're asked the function. Any questions here on the lymph nodes?
The primary follicles, where are they?
Primary follicles are also in the cortex, but they are uniform color throughout. They don't have that germinal center. Okay? And you can see one right in here. Okay? Another one here.
Oh.
But like I said, they're smaller. Not quite as obvious. Okay, there's one over here which is a little more obvious, but it doesn't have the light germinal center like a secondary. Okay?
That's the primary, right?
This is the primary right here. Here's the secondary. No germinal center in the primary. And you can see it's usually close to the medulla. The secondaries tend to be more toward the outside and larger and more numerous. Any other questions on lymph node? All right, let's take a look now at the spleen, another lymphatic organ. Now, the spleen does not have a cortex, it does not have a medulla. Instead, it's divided into what two regions?
Red pulp and white pulp.
Correct, red pulp and white pulp. You should be able to distinguish between them. Something else you may or may not see
Capsule.
is this. What is this?
The capsule.
That's the capsule again. But many slides don't show it because remember the spleen's a fairly good sized organ. And if you're only going to see the capsule, it's right taken, that section is taken right from the edge, like this one. But in this case, you only see it on one side. You see there's no capsule here. There's no capsule on this other edge. And no capsule on the third. Only there's one edge which happens to be taken right at the edge of the follicle, and the edge of the spleen. Okay? What's this structure? That's a trabecula. Again, like in the lymph node, it's an inward extension of the capsule. Again, it's fibrous or dense connective tissue. Helps to support the organ. What region of the spleen is this?
Red pulp.
Red pulp. And the red pulp is characterized by these little canals or channels, which you see here. What do they call it?
Splenic sinus.
You can call them splenic sinuses. You can call them venous sinuses. You can call them splenic sinusoids because it's actually a type of very porous capillary, or venous sinusoids. What you may not call them, if you wish to get credit, is medullary sinus. There is no medulla here. Okay? So splenic or venous sinus, but not medullary sinus. And what's flowing through these canals? Blood, not lymph. Okay? Again, the tissue around the sinuses that we see here is what?
Splenic cord.
Splenic cords, or you can call them Billroth's cords, either one. Okay? Not medullary cords. What kind of cells in here? Macrophage again. What else? Lymphocytes. Lymphatic organs always have lymphocytes. That should be a given. Okay?
Where's the cords?
Where's the cords?
Splenic cords.
They're all over.
They're just everywhere.
All of this.
Okay.
That's what surrounds the cavities, which are the sinuses. So these are the sinuses, these are the cords. Okay? And again, what they are is collections of cells that surround the sinuses. Lymphocytes, macrophages. What's the spleen do? Okay, it filters the blood. It takes debris out of the blood, including microorganisms and worn out red blood cells. All right? It also stores iron. And some of you, when you look at those slides, you saw this brown stuff, granules all over. That was iron stored in the macrophages that have broken down those red blood cells and specifically broken down the hemoglobin. Okay? What else does spleen do? About the fetus, there's some special function. What does it do there?
Red blood cells.
It's the site of red blood cell production, but only in the fetus. Later that's taken over by the red bone marrow. Anything else? It's a platelet reservoir, so it stores platelets as well. Okay? Then of course it's a site for lymphocyte proliferation too. When these lymphocytes here get stimulated by foreign antigen in the blood, they proliferate or produce more of their own. Okay?
So you're gonna ask to say several functions of it, or just one, or?
Yeah, I may very well ask more than one. Okay? So I would know more than one. And in spleen there are a bunch of functions. Wouldn't hurt to know those. Okay? Like I said, there are going to be a lot of questions on this exam on function because we don't have that many slides and very few bodies. Okay? So be prepared for that. Don't say, well, I didn't know about that. I'm telling you right now. Not on function.
And you have multiple questions on one slide, or no?
There'll be at least two questions on each
Okay.
slide. Some of the questions may have two parts.
Okay.
You could have maybe 3 questions or 4 questions on a slide. Okay?
Are you, like if you ask for the functions, are you gonna ask, like, name one?
I can ask
or
function of
name-
lymphatic system, and that's function of lymphatic organs. What particular structures within it. What are the functions of lymphatic system?
Fluid reclamation.
Fluid reclamation is one. Returning fluid from the tissue space of blood. What else? Fluid filtration by virtue of the lymph nodes pulling the debris out of the lymph. What else? Okay, good. Immune surveillance. You've got lymphocytes posted here. Think of them like sort of sentinels on the outskirts. When they come in contact with the foreign invaders, what do? Now the other area of the spleen, which you should also be able to recognize, is the white pulp. And that's fairly distinguishable of these same preparations. A good area there. And right here you can see a good area of white pulp. Now the white pulp consists of a lymphatic follicle. It looks much like the secondary follicles you saw in the lymph nodes. Focus. Got this light area here, the germinal center, ring around it, and then a blood vessel. What's the blood vessel called?
Arterial?
It's called a central arteriole. That's bringing in blood. Looks like, to me, sort of like a little pink donut. Okay, so you get a pointer here. Identify the structure indicated. Your answer should be central artery or central arteriole. Arteriole is a small artery. And it's part of what structure? White pulp.
White pulp.
Okay? So again, when you look at this, you can see the whole thing. And to me, it's sort of like a little island surrounded by a sea of red pulp. So that's white pulp. And again, there's your central artery. And then you've got some other regions here. There's another one. Okay, it's white pulp again. Here's the central artery. Now you're going to have a lot of other blood vessels in here too, but they're larger. So the artery is going to be pretty small, central artery. Okay. Now you got lymphocytes here. They mature, then they migrate out into the cords, the splenic cords, and that's where they come in contact with foreign antigens. They become sensitized and do their thing. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Again, make sure you know the function of these organs. Okay, here's a section through the thymus. Again, like the other organs, we see this connective tissue membrane out here. What is it?
Capsule.
The capsule again. Okay? Now the thymus is divided into regions. What are these called? Those are lobules. The lobules, you can see two distinct portions of lobule. The outer darker stained portion, which you see here, is called the cortex. The inner lighter stained region is the medulla. Okay? And it's in the medulla that you will see these particular structures here. And what are they?
Hassles, corpuscles.
Those are the Hassel's corpuscles or thymic corpuscles, easier to term. Okay? And again, they're in the medulla. What's their function? Now your photo that says function unknown. I'm not going to accept that. There is a function.
It secretes the chemicals that help with
They
the
secrete chemicals involved in the maturation of the T lymphocytes. So if you're asked the site of T lymphocyte maturation, your answer should be thymus. If you're asked the function of the thymic or Hassel's corpuscles, they're involved in that maturation process. Okay? So function unknown is not acceptable. Right? You know your photo list says that. Don't say, well, the book says. All right, I'm telling you right now what I learned. Okay? And if you look in your textbook, recent edition, it talks about functions. Okay? So I'm not just making it up.
making it up to see if we're paying attention.
Right. And see, if I got to make it up, I'm making up the test, right? So it's my word, right? Well, no, I do have something to back me up. Okay. Any questions on the thymus? All right. Something else we looked at, or we looked at yesterday? We're looking at here at a section through the small intestine. And right now you don't need to worry about all the structures in the small intestine. That's coming later when we get the digestive system. Then I'll be expecting you to pick out the various regions of the intestine, but not now. What I want you to identify here are these collections of lymphocytes. You see right here, it looks like kind of a purple granular area. This is in the mucosa being the lining of the small intestine. What do we call these?
Tires patches.
Those are Peyer's patches. That's part of the mold. Again, you should know what the mold means. What does it mean? Mucosa, not mucus, mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. It's collections of lymphocytes scattered around the body. And in the wall, the small intestine, they have a fancy name, they're called Peyer's patches. And that's what these are. Purple granular areas. And again, if you remember, when you looked at the lymphocytes in the blood smears, what do they look like? Purple granular nucleus. That's mostly what you saw, very little cytoplasm. Okay? So these are Peyer's patches. They can be quite prominent, especially in the distal end of the small intestine, called the ileum. Okay? And here again, you can see them maybe a little better. These are all Peyer's patches. Okay? The tonsils are also part of the mold. You've also got these collections of lymphocytes in the walls of your bronchial tubes, your lungs, and also in the appendix, which is part of the large intestine. Okay?
What's the function of it?
Function is to intercept microorganisms that have penetrated the tissue to help keep them from spreading. And especially the tonsil, this is why the tonsils frequently become inflamed, because they pick up bacteria, and then of course your lymphocytes start to multiply, and that causes them to swell, just like your lymph nodes. Okay? The problem in the throat is they can become so swollen that they restrict breathing, and secondly, it can be a source of continued infection if they harbor the bacteria. And sometimes hard to get rid of, especially in children. Okay, one last thing. Other slide that I showed you. Now this is another view of a lymph node. This has been specially stained, and it shows you the reticular fibers. Which are these black wavy lines that you see here. Now what is this, what's the function of these reticular fibers?
Keep sinuses open?
Yes, they help to keep the sinuses open. In this case, it'd be the medullary sinuses. Little dots here, these are the nuclei, the reticular cells that produce those reticular fibers. Okay? They form this internal framework within the organ. We find them in the thymus, we find them in the lymph node, we find them in the spleen as well. And again, major function here, particularly in the lymph nodes and in the spleen, is to keep those sinuses open, keep from collapsing. Okay. What are the sinuses in the lymph node called? Medullary sinuses, because they're in the medulla. Right? And what are the sinuses in the spleen called? Splenic, not medullary, because they're in your red pulp. Medulla there. Okay? What flows through the sinuses, medullary sinuses in the lymph node? What fluid? Lymph, not blood. Right? What flows through the splenic sinuses? Yes, blood in the spleen. Okay? Spleen filters blood, lymph nodes filter lymph. So remember that. Be surprised. You ask that question, I just blood. I give it lymph in the wrong one. Think about it. Don't use the forest for the trees. Any questions? Good. Sounds like you're all ready.
Do you have any blood, Dr. Harrison, do you have any blood slides that you can?
No, because I put them up there. I got to put them on oil immersion to really see them. And that's a hassle. I'm not going to put the blood cells on. But if you want to look at your scope, I'd be glad to identify them for you.
Excuse me, what are the black lines called?
They're called reticular fibers.
Fibers.
They're produced by reticular cells. Now, one other thing. On these models, you can see some of the organs, lymphatic organs. For example, what's this? That is the spleen. There's something you couldn't see on the slide, but I said, look at the models. The embedded area in the medial aspect where blood vessels come and go, what's it called? Hilus. Your book calls it the hilum. Either term is acceptable. Hilus or hilum. That's the indented area on the spleen where the blood vessels enter and leave the spleen. You can see it over here on the dorsal model as well. Right here. Okay. You can also see down here in the leg, these little pink globes here. What are they? Lymph nodes. Which ones? Inguinal, right. That'll be erased from the board, by the way. All right. Inguinal lymph nodes, and the white lines here are lymphatic vessels. Okay, and I could say lymphatic vessels feeding into the lymph node, what are they? The afferent lymphatic vessels, and draining lymph nodes? Ether. A before E. Think of ether as exiting.
And E for exit.
Yeah, exit. Exactly. Good way to remember. What's this up here? No. This is the
Thyroid.
Be careful. This is the thyroid. Doesn't show the thymus on this. Okay, this is an adult, and the thymus gets smaller and smaller with age, right? Okay, there's something else up here. We've got the intestines. And here you can see the so-called vermiform appendix. Looks like a little worm. That's what vermiform means. Worm shape or worm form. And it comes off the cecum, which is the proximal part of the large intestine. That also is part of the mold. We've got lymphatic patches in there as well. Okay? And then up here, also part of the mold, the tonsils. You should be able to pick those out. So we've got three sets of tonsils. Up here, in the upper part of the pharynx or throat, that's called the nasopharynx. These are called pharyngeal tonsils, also known as the adenoid. Down here, if you still have your tonsil open in your mouth, you can see these. Those are the palatine tonsils. And then at the base of the tongue, right here, the lingual tonsil. Okay? Well, you guys probably won't be able to see it. So again, up here, that's the pharyngeal.